I heard my husband's voice boom across the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Club. Honestly, gentlemen, I don't know why Margaret insists on playing businesswoman at her age. It's embarrassing watching her pretend that little non-profit of hers matters. She should be home, maybe taking up gardening. The laughter that followed felt like knives. I stood 10 feet away, holding a champagne flute I no longer wanted, watching Richard charm the circle of businessmen who'd paid $50,000 each to attend his firm's annual charity gala. Our charity gala, technically, the one benefiting the foundation I'd spent 23 years building. He didn't know I could hear him. Or perhaps he didn't care. Between you and me, Richard continued, his voice dropping to that conspiratorial tone he used when he wanted to seem like he was sharing secrets. I've been telling her for years to just shut it down. The foundation loses money every quarter. I've been covering the shortfalls out of my own pocket, just to avoid the embarrassment of having my wife's little project go bankrupt. More laughter. Someone clapped him on the shoulder. I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. I simply stood there in my silver gown. The one Richard had said made me look trying too hard, and let his words settle into my bones. 23 years. I'd spent 23 years building the Riverside Women's Educational Foundation from nothing. We'd put over 4,000 women through college. We'd funded medical schools, law schools, business programs. We'd changed lives. And Richard had just called it my little non-profit that he had to bankroll. I turned and walked toward the coat check, my heels silent on the marble floor. The young woman behind the counter smiled as she retrieved my wrap. "Leaving early, Mrs. Morrison?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I have work to do." I didn't say goodbye to Richard. I didn't make a scene. I simply walked out of the Metropolitan Club at 9:47 on a Saturday night in October and got into the waiting car that had been paid for by my foundation's operational budget. The foundation that, according to our audited financials I'd reviewed just that morning, had $32 million in assets and a AAA non-profit rating. The foundation, Richard claimed to be funding out of his own pocket. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Home, Mrs. Morrison?" "The office," I said. "I need to check something." I'd married Richard Morrison 41 years ago when I was 22 and he was 25. He'd been charming, ambitious, already making a name for himself in commercial real estate development. I'd been fresh out of college with a degree in social work and dreams of changing the world. For the first 15 years, I'd supported his career. I'd hosted dinners for his clients, smiled at his business partners, raised our 2 children while he built Morrison Development into one of the largest real estate firms in the Northeast. When the kids went to college, I'd started the foundation with money I'd inherited from my mother, $20,000. That was all I'd had. Richard had laughed when I told him my plan. "A foundation? Margaret, you've never run anything more complex than a PTA bake sale. But sure, if you need a hobby, go ahead." A hobby? I'd heard him use that word before, but hearing it again tonight, in front of his colleagues and clients, at an event held in honor of work I'd dedicated 2 decades to building, something inside me crystallized into perfect clarity. The office building was dark when I arrived. I used my key card to access the executive floor, where my office overlooked the city. I didn't turn on all the lights, just my desk lamp, and I opened my laptop. I pulled up our foundation's financial records. Every transaction, every grant, every donation we'd received over 23 years, I'd always kept meticulous records. It was something Richard had mocked. "You and your endless spreadsheets, Margaret," but tonight, those spreadsheets were going to tell me a story. I started with the current fiscal year. The foundation had received $8.7 million in donations. We'd given out $6.2 million in scholarships and grants. Operating expenses were $900,000. That left us with a surplus of $1.6 million, which had been moved into our endowment fund. I went back further. Every year for the past 15 years showed the same pattern. We received more than we spent. We were growing, steadily and strategically. Then I opened a folder I rarely looked at Richard's business accounts that we shared for tax purposes. Morrison Development had access to some of our foundation's investment accounts because Richard's accountant had recommended it years ago for tax optimization. I'd signed the papers without thinking much about it. I started scrolling through the transactions. And there it was. Over the past 5 years, Richard had made 17 transfers from the foundation's accounts into Morrison Development's operating fund. Small amounts, at first $50,000 here, $75,000 there. Amounts I might not notice in our quarterly reviews. But in the last 18 months, the transfers had gotten larger. $200,000, $350,000. The most recent one, just 6 weeks ago, was for $600,000. Total amount transferred, $4.2 million. My hands were shaking. I took a screenshot of every transaction. I downloaded the records onto a secure drive. Then I called my attorney. Patricia Chen had been handling the foundation's legal work for 8 years. She was sharp, no nonsense, and she answered on the second ring even though it was nearly 11 on a Saturday night. "Margaret, are you all right?" "Patricia, I need you to look at something. Can you come to the office tomorrow morning, early?" There was a pause. "This is about Richard, isn't it?" I closed my eyes. "How did you know?" "Margaret, I've been waiting for you to ask me that question for 3 years. I'll be there at 7. I didn't go home that night. I sat in my office, reviewing every document, every transaction, building a timeline. At some point around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. "Richard, where are you? You embarrassed me, leaving like that." I didn't respond. Patricia arrived at 6:55 the next morning with coffee and a briefcase. She took one look at me and said, "You didn't sleep." I couldn't. I turned my laptop toward her. "Look at this." It took her 40 minutes to review everything. When she finally looked up, her expression was grim. "This is embezzlement, Margaret. He's been systematically stealing from the foundation, and given that you're both on the board, he's probably been filing fraudulent tax documents. Can we prove it? With these records?" "Absolutely. But Margaret," she hesitated, "you need to understand what happens if you pursue this. Richard will argue he had authorization, that you knew about the transfers, that it was all legitimate business expenses. He'll make this ugly." "He already made it ugly," I said quietly. "Last night at the gala, he told a room full of people that the foundation loses money every quarter, and that he's been covering the shortfalls out of his own pocket." Patricia's jaw tightened. "He said that? In public? In front of at least 30 people. Did anyone record it?" "I hadn't thought of that. I don't know." "Find out. Because if we can prove he's been lying publicly about the foundation's finances while simultaneously embezzling from it, we can make a case for fraud that goes beyond just the transfers." I spent Sunday making phone calls. I reached out to 3 people who'd been at the gala, people I trusted. By Monday morning, I had something better than a recording. I had a sworn statement from James Chen, the CFO of Riverside Hospital, who'd been standing in Richard's circle during that conversation. "I remember it clearly," James wrote. Richard Morrison stated that his wife's foundation was financially struggling and that he'd been personally covering operational shortfalls. He used the phrase, "little nonprofit," and suggested she should close it down. Given that I serve on the board of 3 nonprofits and understand financial disclosure requirements, I found his statements concerning. Patricia read the statement and smiled for the first time since we'd started working on this. "This is good, Margaret. This is very good. What do we do now?" "Now? We file a complaint with the State Attorney General's Office for Nonprofit Fraud. We notify the IRS about the unreported transfers. We freeze the foundation's accounts so he can't move any more money. And we prepare for him to fight back. Because he will." "I know," I said, "but Patricia, I want one more thing." "What's that?" "I want to host a press conference. A public one. I want to announce that the Riverside Women's Educational Foundation is launching an independent financial audit and that we're cooperating with state investigators. I want everyone who heard Richard say I was running a failing nonprofit to know the truth." Patricia studied me for a long moment. "That's declaring war, Margaret." "Good," I said, "because I'm done being the understanding wife." The press conference happened on Wednesday morning. I stood in front of 15 reporters, 3 television cameras, and read a prepared statement. My voice didn't shake once. For 23 years, the Riverside Women's Educational Foundation has been committed to educational access for women who've faced barriers to higher education. In that time, we've awarded over $90 million in scholarships and grants. We've maintained a AAA nonprofit rating and have consistently operated with a fiscal surplus that we've invested back into our endowment. However, recent internal audits have revealed financial discrepancies that require investigation. We are cooperating fully with the State Attorney General's office and have invited independent auditors to review our records. We remain committed to transparency and to the women we serve. I didn't mention Richard by name. I didn't have to. Every reporter in that room knew who I was married to, and they'd all been at the gala Saturday night covering the event. The story broke on the evening news. By Thursday morning, it was in the New York Times. Richard called me 17 times on Wednesday. I didn't answer. He showed up at the foundation's office on Thursday. Security didn't let him pass the lobby. On Friday, I had the locks changed at our house while he was at work. The divorce papers were delivered to his office on Monday morning. Patricia had included a detailed accounting of the embezzled funds, a request for full restitution to the foundation, and a demand that Richard resign from all positions associated with the foundation's board. His attorney called mine within an hour. Mrs. Morrison is clearly having some kind of breakdown, Richard's lawyer, Douglas Watts, said. These accusations are baseless. Mr. Morrison has been nothing but supportive of his wife's charitable efforts. Patricia's response was calm and devastating. Mr. Morrison made public statements on October 15, claiming the foundation was operating at a loss and that he was personally funding its operations. We have sworn testimony from multiple witnesses. Meanwhile, our audited financials show a consistent operational surplus. We also have documentation of 17 unauthorized transfers, totaling $4.2 million from foundation accounts to Morrison Development. If Mr. Morrison would like to argue that he was authorized to make those transfers, he's welcome to do so in court, but he should be aware that would constitute an admission that he lied to the IRS about those transfers on his tax filings for the past 5 years. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "We'll be in touch," Douglas finally said. The investigation moved faster than I'd expected. The State Attorney General's office assigned 2 investigators who spent 3 weeks reviewing every document we provided. The IRS opened a parallel investigation into Morrison Development's tax filings. In the meantime, I moved forward with restructuring the foundation. I brought in a new CFO, a woman named Sarah Mitchell, who'd run the financial operations for a national nonprofit with a budget 10 times the size of ours. I established new oversight procedures, separated all financial accounts from anything connected to Richard, and scheduled our first independent audit in November. The media attention was intense. I gave exactly 3 interviews, all carefully coordinated with Patricia. In each one, I said the same thing. The foundation's mission has never been about me or my marriage. It's about the women we serve. And we're not going to let anything distract us from that mission. Behind the scenes, the divorce proceeded. Richard tried to claim he was entitled to half of the foundation's assets because he'd contributed to its development. Patricia's response was a detailed forensic accounting showing that every dollar Richard had ever contributed to the foundation was actually money he'd embezzled from it. He tried to claim I'd damaged his reputation with the press conference. Patricia pointed out that he'd damaged his own reputation by lying about the foundation's finances in a room full of witnesses. He tried to claim I'd abandoned him without cause. Patricia submitted our evidence of embezzlement and asked if he'd like to explain that to a judge. In January, 4 months after I'd walked out of that gala, Richard's attorney called with a settlement offer. Richard would repay the full $4.2 million to the foundation. He would resign from all positions on the foundation's board. He would sign a statement acknowledging that the foundation had never operated at a loss and that his previous public statements to that effect had been inaccurate. In exchange, I would agree to a quiet divorce with no further public statements about the embezzlement. No criminal charges? Patricia asked. The Attorney General's office has agreed not to pursue charges if full restitution is made, and Mr. Morrison cooperates with their investigation. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Accept the offer. The divorce was finalized in March. I kept the house, my inheritance, and my freedom. Richard kept his company, though 2 of his biggest clients had quietly ended their relationships with Morrison Development after the scandal broke. The foundation's independent audit was completed in April. We'd not only operated with consistent surpluses, but our program effectiveness ratings were among the highest in the state. The auditors recommended we actually expand our operations. In May, I hired 3 new staff members and opened a second office in Albany. We launched a new scholarship program specifically for women over 40 returning to education. The first year, we received over 1,500 applications. By June, 18 months after that night at the Gala, the Riverside Women's Educational Foundation had grown its endowment to $41 million. We were on track to award $12 million in scholarships that year, nearly double our previous record. I was sitting in my office reviewing applications when Sarah knocked on my door. "Margaret? There's someone here to see you. She says it's personal." I looked up, surprised. "Who is it?" "Jennifer Morrison. She says she's your daughter." My heart stopped. Jennifer was 38, worked in tech in San Francisco, and I hadn't spoken to her in 6 months. Not since the divorce started and she'd told me I was destroying Dad over nothing. "Send her in." Jennifer looked older than I remembered. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She stood in the doorway for a moment, then stepped inside. "Mom." "Jennifer." I stood up. "This is unexpected." "I know." She closed the door behind her. "I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you about 100 apologies." I waited. "Dad came to visit me last month," she said. "He wanted to talk about getting us kids to convince you to drop the restitution requirement. He said you were being vindictive, that the foundation stuff was just a misunderstanding, that you'd always been bad with money and didn't understand how business worked. And I told him I'd think about it. Then I went home, and I did something I should have done months ago. I actually looked at the foundation's financial records. Mom, they're public. I could have looked any time. I didn't want to believe that Dad would lie." She sat down in the chair across from my desk, and I saw tears in her eyes. "You built something incredible. The foundation isn't some vanity project. It's a real organization doing real work, and it's been successful for 20 years. And Dad," her voice broke, "Dad lied about all of it. To me, to everyone. He told me you were wasting money, that the foundation was failing, that he'd been trying to help. But the numbers don't lie, do they?" "No," I said quietly. "They don't." "I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have believed you. I should have looked at the evidence instead of just taking his word for it." I came around the desk and hugged her. She cried against my shoulder the way she hadn't since she was a little girl. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're here now. What he did was theft, Mom. It was fraud. And you handled it. You didn't fall apart. You didn't let him destroy what you'd built. You fought back, and you won." "I fought back," I corrected gently. "But I won when I walked out of that gala and decided I deserved better. Everything after that was just details." We talked for 3 hours. She told me about her life, her job, her partner whom I'd never met because Richard had convinced her I wouldn't approve. I told her about the foundation's plans to expand, about the women whose lives we were changing, about how I'd finally found work that felt like mine. When she left, she hugged me again. "I'm proud of you, Mom. I know I should have said that a long time ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm so proud of you." After she left, I sat at my desk and looked out at the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. My phone buzzed. An email from Sarah. "Margaret just got confirmation. The Watson Foundation wants to partner with us on the new program. They're committing $5 million over 3 years. $5 million. More women educated. More lives changed. more proof that the work I'd built mattered. I thought about Richard, about that night at the gala when he'd laughed with his friends about my little nonprofit. I wondered if he knew that the foundation he'd mocked was now receiving multi-million-dollar partnerships. If he'd seen the feature article about us in Forbes. If he understood yet that the thing he'd tried to diminish was the thing that would define my legacy. Probably not. Men like Richard rarely understood what they'd lost until it was far too late to matter. I closed my laptop and gathered my things. It was Friday evening, and I had plans. The foundation's staff had invited me to dinner to celebrate the Watson partnership. 22 people who believed in the work we were doing, who showed up every day to change lives. I wasn't building an empire. I never had been. I was building something better, a foundation that would outlast me, that would continue changing lives long after I was gone. Something that mattered. As I locked my office and headed toward the elevator, I thought about all the women I'd met over the years, the single mothers going back to school, the survivors of domestic violence rebuilding their lives, the women who'd been told they were too old, too poor, too damaged to deserve an education. I'd been one of them once. The wife who'd been told her dreams were hobbies, her work was embarrassing, her value was measured by how well she supported someone else's ambitions. But I'd walked out of that ballroom. I'd done the work. I'd built something real. And, if I could do it at 63 years old, with nothing but $20,000 and a dream, then maybe, just maybe, the women we were helping could do it too. That was the real revenge. Not destroying Richard, though watching him have to write that $4.2 million check had been satisfying. The real revenge was succeeding, thriving, building something that mattered without him. The real revenge was proving that I'd never needed him in the first place. I stepped out into the evening air, where Sarah and the rest of the team were waiting. Someone had brought champagne. Someone else had ordered a cake that said 5 million reasons to celebrate. Speech, they called as I approached. I raised my glass and looked at the faces around me. These people who believed in the work, who showed up every day to make a difference. 23 years ago, I said, someone told me that starting this foundation was just a hobby, that it didn't matter, that I should give up and do something more appropriate for a woman my age. I paused, letting that sink in. This week, we secured a $5 million partnership. This year, we'll put 600 women through college. Over the past 2 decades, we've changed 4,000 lives, and we're just getting started. I raised my glass higher. So here's to hobbies that change the world, and here's to proving that the people who underestimate us are the ones who end up left behind. We drank to that, and as I stood there surrounded by my team, by the work we'd built together, I realized something important. I didn't need Richard to fail for me to succeed. I didn't need his regret, or his apology, or his acknowledgement that he'd been wrong. I just needed to keep doing the work. Keep changing lives. Keep proving that what I'd built mattered. Everything else was just noise. And I was done listening to noise.